Luke Noonan from RUST, and it's entitled Lessons from the Trenches. Luke is a globe-trotting media artist, designer, punk, technologist, entrepreneur, educator, social justice warrior, and noisemaker, co-founder and president of RUST, and a lot of things done for virtual reality. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got all the right ports there. Cool. So thank you for inviting me up here. It's my first time here in Finland, so it's been a really great trip. So does that work? Oh, it does work. Nice. Yeah, I'm co-founder, president. We wear a lot of hats. I'm also designer. I was accountant for quite a long time. RUST Ltd. So we are based in Los Angeles, California, and in Bristol, England. And we've been working in games, virtual reality, and other sort of interactive and playful media since about 2009, depending on how you measure it. And we do a mix of consulting work, contract design and development, and our own IP development. So as I'm going to touch on each of those a little bit as we move through this talk. So first, a little bit of history. So this screenshot here was of a project we did called Museum of the Microstar. And I love starting with this one because this was a tech demo itself that satirized or made fun of other tech demos. So it was done as part of a contest that Unity Technologies, who makes the game engine, was holding when they rolled out their new DirectX 11 feature set in their engine. And so you need to use all of these new features to, in the demo, and spoiler alert, we won, and it was good. But importantly, not long after this happened, like within a couple of weeks, the initial Oculus Kickstarter started sending out their hardware. And so we took that opportunity, because we had this just finished project, we still remembered how everything worked, it hadn't left our memories yet. So we ported it very quickly to that hardware. And we learned two important things. First off, that that when you're moving between those sort of platforms where there's different hardware affordances, you really can't take anything for granted as you move between this. So if we're going to be honest, the VR version of this project was a mess. You got really sick. It was difficult to control. And anyone who's done enough of this work will know that that's obvious. But in our defense, this was still pretty new there. And we weren't some amateurs going into this. We had done work for cave systems. We'd done work with other tracking setups. We were really well positioned. And even with that new hardware still sort of threw us for a loop. The other thing that we sort of got out of this project was that there was, we won a big contest. Thousands and thousands of dollars in prizes. We gave conference talks on it. We got way more press out of the VR port of it than we did out of the initial contest win. And the first version was probably better. It was probably better on a flat screen than it was in VR. So that gave us a real clue. And this sort of started us down this road that has sort of landed us here today. So if we look back at the work that we've done as a group, we see that it covers a wide number of different fields. So just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, we've done work from board games to high-end tech demos for GPU manufacturers. We've done mobile apps to amusement park attractions. When we've had clients which range from university research labs, not unlike this one, to advertising agencies, to hardware companies. And the common thread that sort of ties all those together, because even looking back, it feels pretty disparate. But I sort of, in thinking about it, I realized that most of these relationships with these partners and these projects start with a conversation or that looks something like this. We don't know if this is possible, but here's what we want to do. And so often we're like, oh, that's impossible, that's impossible. This one we can do. I don't think anyone's done that before. And that's where we sort of, the way we normally start. And so this is where we feel really comfortable, is working in these new forms, building these new rubrics and languages for how to interact with things. So that brings us to our most popular title. So early in 2016, we launched a game called Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades, or H3 VR for short. It's a physics-based sandbox game for the HTC Vive initially, and now a couple other platforms. And we launched it into Steam Early Access, like right as a launch title. And it's done really well. And its success, besides being surprising and made some money, which is nice, has also given us this really fascinating view on how that industry works. And that, along with our sort of contracting background, is where the rest of the talk sort of comes from. So as we move forward here, I want to take a look at where the market's at now and how we see that as informing this work for developers in the future. So first, to sort of talk about what the VR market looks like. And the elephant in the room for a lot of developers is the fact that in the VR world, there's a small market share. And why is this, or sorry, small market cap, market size there. Why is this important? Well, video games are complicated and expensive to make, as we'll talk about, as are all sorts of other things that are functionally like video games, just less fun, I guess. And this is a problem, because even if you sell one copy to everyone, that's still not that many people. So that's why a lot of people are really sort of down on this. They've seen these projections, and it's not, well, we'll look at how that market works here. But before we get to that, I wanted to just sort of get this out of the way. So VR, or AR, MR, XR, whatever your acronym of choice is, isn't just games and movies and entertainment products. And this is something that we've known for a long time. If you look at architecture, if you look at planning, if you look at scientific research, if you look at medicine, you look at all these other fields that aren't entertainment, they're all, as we've seen, adopting this technology in a big way. They're using it, they're integrating it, they're building new things, they're making financial investments into this technology. And as a result, anyone who says that VR, AR, MR, XR, et cetera, are dead are just clearly don't know how much money the architecture industry alone is pouring into this. We actually, before H3, we paid our rent for the better part of a year doing nothing but architectural visualization projects. It's a big part of it. That being said, you've had a lot of discussion on that one, so a lot of the rest of the talk is going to be focused on the entertainment sector, because that's where I spend my time. So let's take a step back for a moment and think about what the current state of the overall ecosystem looks like. So first, we've got this weird phenomenon of infinite demand. So games have very quickly crested into this territory that movies are in, that music has been in for a long time, where you've got this fire hose of new content that comes out on a regular basis. The example I like to give is if you look at Steam, and it's a fun thing to actually try and find the worst possible game. Like some stuff's good, but like the poorest reviewed, however you find it, and you look for the worst possible game, and you'll find some really, really poor titles. And you're like, who would possibly buy one of these? These look terrible. Or it looks not fun to me, at least, in some of those cases. And then if you look at what the sales numbers are, it's hundreds, maybe thousands of people have bought that game. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it shows that there's this huge supply, or that anyone will find your particular game appealing in that way. So the flip side of that is that there's also an infinite supply. So why are all those terrible games on there because it's really easy and it's cheap to make these sort of products at the low end. So so who here plays a video game on occasion? A bunch of people. So who here's got some games in a Steam account somewhere? Now keep your hands up if you've played every single one of those games. Okay, there's one or two. It's good. That there's just so much coming out. Now that they've streamlined these publishing processes, that you've got hundreds to thousands of games coming out every month. And that's just on one platform. You've also got other PC distribution platforms. You've got video game consoles. The mobile front, it's hundreds of games per day that come out there. So what does this mean? What does it mean when you've got infinite supply meeting infinite demand in that case? Well, the gotcha here is that it changes how this industry needs to work. That instead of finding the right product and finding the right market, it's all about how you connect supply to demand there. So one of the cases here is how, like, the advertising industry. So this is how AAA video games solve this problem. You take your production budget, and you take that much money, $50 million, whatever it was, and you just take that much more money, and you buy every billboard in Los Angeles, and you sell enough copies to make up the difference. If you look at Google and Facebook, for instance, they're both advertising companies. You know, they offer different products and stuff, but they're both advertising companies because it's about connecting the supply and the demand are the biggest parts of that. So that's all pretty depressing in a lot of ways there. But importantly, the VR games market and the VR entertainment market generally is not the flat games market. It isn't at that, and we're going to talk for a couple reasons, a couple ways in which it's different. But this is actually really good news for all of us doing this sort of work. So the first point is we haven't hit any saturation point yet. So on the hardware front, there's millions and millions of users that haven't bought in yet. These are users that are interested, that will eventually invest in some hardware or invest in access to hardware. And so as new hardware improves, as costs get better, you've got a giant market, and that's going to continue to grow, which is good news for everyone. On the software side, there just isn't enough content at all. The people who are already buying this content want to buy more. If they bought every game on Steam, they're going to buy every game on, available for a while. So that's some good news there. Cost is still a huge factor, and this is sort of why we've hit that. That on the consumer side, the cost of the hardware, the cost of what it takes to develop and to move a new product to market. We've seen a couple of hardware companies here today, and well, why don't they just sell to everyone right away? Because cost is a huge problem. And on the consumer side, or on the developer side, you've got what it costs to develop software too. Like these are really complicated pieces of software that you need to build. And so there's this chicken and egg scenario, and we've all heard about like when will the big AAA game developers start investing in this kind of content? Well, when there's a big enough market. When will there be a big enough market? When there's content to lure people onto this market there. So it's an awkward scenario, but it will only get better. On the development front, performance is a headache. It's not just sometimes it's a literal headache too, that you're going from we hit 30 frames per second and you're doing good to you need to reliably hit 75, 90, sometimes 120 frames per second at much, bigger than 4K resolutions. And if you drop those frames, your users don't just have a bad time, they get sick, or they get a headache, or they trip and fall. Like, the stakes have never been higher performance-wise, and that's just a really hard thing to do. That's not going away. Like, resolutions are getting bigger. This arms race is going to be a real pain for a while. But in the end, I think Moore's Law will sort of catch up, and it'll get better. Community is super important, and this, as we're talking about this market as it develops, this is one of the places where you can still get organic community growth. H3 is a niche game. It's a gun simulator. We've got 3,000 die-hard fans on our subreddit that post regularly. We've built communities on YouTube, and we've built communities elsewhere. And while we've done an okay job, we're hardly experts in that field. That this is one area where you can still have that kind of organic growth, and that's enough to buoy a company. If you want to build a mobile game, you need to be spending as much as you're spending on your salaries on advertisement to keep your user community up. And the minute you stop spending on that, they move and go somewhere else. Because of where this market's at, because we haven't hit the saturation point, the VR market is way more forgiving along those lines. If only it was cheaper to make games, it'd be great. So then to shift a little bit into that's all really good, and I think that the takeaway here is we need to focus on building these communities and having centers and groups of people that are doing this kind of work and building those communities is super important. So one thing we've seen, and this is as a designer, at heart I spend my time designing stuff, we're seeing this interesting crossover, and this is across both the professional and industry spaces as well as the entertainment space. But using solutions that exist from other fields is going to be increasingly important as we move forward here. We've got these environments that we're in are increasingly realistic in ways that we never thought about before. It's not just how it looks or how it sounds, but now how it feels, how you move through it. And while that takes a lot of rules and throws them out the window, we've got solutions in place that we can pull from other industries. So in terms of the design language, if we think about Quake, so you played Quake with the WASD keys and your mouse. So that gave you 2 axes on your left hand and 2 axes of control on your right hand. And you had to control an entire human avatar with 4 axes of control. Now, fast forward to say that the DK1 era hardware, and suddenly you've got a couple of axes of control on your neck. So instead of controlling where you look with your hands, you control with your neck. As we move forward into the DK2 and CV1, suddenly you're getting more nuanced control. So suddenly you're able to move your whole body around, and that flight sims got awesome all of a sudden. You don't need to worry about, oh, what's the button to look behind me to see if I'm getting shot at? You just look behind you and see if you're getting shot at. As we move all the way into, say, the Vive and the Oculus Touch, suddenly you've got, there's no way to get this movement with a mouse and keyboard. Like you can't get your hand to do that, and it's trivially easy all of a sudden. So what does that mean? Well, one, with every one of those changes, we need to sort of throw out the book and write a new one usually. But this also means that we can move closer and closer to these design areas that we already know. Ergonomics, human factors, basic UI, UX sort of things. Stuff from those fields are going to become increasingly relevant. Well, where should we put these things? Make it a lever that you can move physically. Like how do we make our train simulator awesome? Build it like a train. Somebody already designed that. So I think that that's one of the exciting parts of this design space, is being able to pull in more of these fields. Which sort of brings to the final point here about accessibility and audience. If we think about, for a moment, what made sort of cell phones so compelling. Now there's cost and there's price, and there's lots of factors there, but one of the things from a design standpoint that I thought was really compelling was, when you want to do something, how do you interact with it? You don't move some other object somewhere else and have something translate. You just touch it. And that seems dumb. You're like, of course you just touch it, that's what you... But that kind of one-to-one direct interaction made that so accessible. That's why you've got the, oh, suddenly grandma can use this. Suddenly my 2-year-old can use this computer. And as we've heard other speakers talk about, that accessibility is crucial. We're in for an even bigger change with this new hardware. If you know how to use a flashlight, you know how to use a flashlight in-game. You hold the thing and you point it at what you want to point at and interact with. Suddenly the barrier to entry is so low. You don't need to know what buttons are which. You don't need to know which joystick does what. If you can walk through the door, you know how to use the Omnideck. if you can look at the clouds, you know how to look at stuff in these virtual spaces. There's a whole host of people that have been excluded from these virtual spaces for the difficulties in these areas. And those are people that are ready and waiting to go. Those are new markets, and that's where things are going to truly explode here. That we're going to get not just better and better versions of the content that we've already got, and we will get that, but we're also going to get whole new genres that none of us have thought of before, because suddenly people who couldn't deal with this are going to have access to these virtual spaces. Thanks.